I quit my career and moved back home to care for my dying mother. She secretly changed her will and left everything to my sister, who visited twice a year. 3 years of my life, my savings and my career gone. And my mother left everything to the daughter who sent flowers on birthdays. My name is Claire Whitfield. I'm 38 years old. 3 years ago, I left my apartment, my career, and the life I had built to move back into my childhood home and take care of my mother. I bathed her. I managed her medications. I drove her to every doctor's appointment. I stayed up through the bad nights. I held her hand through the worst days. I gave up everything. And when my mother died, I found out she had secretly changed her will and left the house to my sister. My sister, who visited twice a year. My sister, who sent flowers on birthdays and called on Sunday afternoons and offered money when it was convenient. My sister, who never once packed a bag and came home to stay. My mother left the house, our childhood home, worth $380,000, entirely to Rachel. She left me $15,000 and a note in the attorney's file explaining that Rachel needed a foundation, and that Claire had always been capable of taking care of herself. I had just spent 3 years taking care of everyone but myself. And my mother's final message to me was that my capability was a reason to reward me less. This is what it costs to be the dependable one. This is what it costs to show up. I need to start at the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the full picture. My mother's name was Diana. She was a warm woman, funny in a quiet, dry way. She loved gardening and old movies and strong coffee. She raised Rachel and me mostly on her own after our father left when I was 12 and Rachel was 6. She worked as an office manager for a dental practice for 22 years, saved carefully, paid off the house, built a modest, stable life in Salem, Oregon, in the house where she brought both of her daughters home from the hospital. Rachel and I grew up in that house. It was small but well kept. A 3-bedroom craftsman on a street with oak trees that turned gold every October. Mom kept the garden immaculate. There were always flowers on the kitchen table. I left Salem for Portland when I was 22 for college, then stayed. Built a life there. Worked my way up in marketing, eventually becoming a manager at a mid-sized agency. I had an apartment I loved, a small circle of close friends, a relationship that had lasted almost 2 years, a career I was proud of. Rachel left for New York at 23, right after college, and thrived there immediately. She went into finance. She was sharp and driven and very good at her job. She made more money than I did, more money than our mother had ever made, and she knew it. She was generous in the way that wealthy people are sometimes generous, sending money for problems rather than time for solutions. We loved each other. Our family loved each other. It was not a dramatic family. It was not a family with old grudges and screaming matches. It was a quiet family that communicated in practicalities. Which is why what happened hurt so deeply. When I was 34, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She said she needed to tell me something and that I should sit down. She had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease. She was 62. I remember how steady her voice was when she told me. She was already trying to manage my reaction. That was Diana. Always managing. Always protecting the people around her from the weight of things. I drove to Salem that weekend. Spent 2 days with her. We talked about the diagnosis, about what it meant, about the progression doctors had outlined. Parkinson's is not a quick disease. It moves slowly, then all at once. In the early stages, people manage reasonably well. Then the tremors worsen. The falls start. The cognitive changes begin. And eventually, the person you love needs help with things they have done alone their entire lives. Rachel flew in from New York the following weekend. We had a family conversation, the 3 of us sitting at the kitchen table with coffee. Mom laid out what she wanted. She wanted to stay in her house as long as possible. She did not want a nursing facility. She did not want to be a burden. She always said that she didn't want to be a burden, as if her being ill was an imposition she had chosen. Rachel said all the right things. We'll figure it out. You won't be alone in this. We'll make sure you're taken care of. She flew back to New York 2 days later. For the first year after the diagnosis, Mom was relatively independent. She drove herself to appointments. She cooked her own meals. She managed her medications. I drove down from Portland on weekends sometimes. We talked on the phone every few days. Rachel called on Sundays, sometimes Saturdays. The second year things shifted. Mom had a fall in the kitchen. Nothing broken, but it scared her. Her neurologist adjusted her medications and recommended she stop driving. Suddenly she needed rides to appointments, groceries, pharmacy runs. Things that seem small but are actually constant. I started driving to Salem more frequently, every other weekend, then most weekends. I was still working full-time in Portland. I was still managing my apartment, my relationships, my life. But I was spending more and more of my time and energy and mental space on my mother's needs, and I was doing it mostly alone. I raised the situation with Rachel during one of our phone calls. I think Mom needs more consistent support, I said. I'm coming down most weekends, but it's not sustainable long-term, and I think she needs someone with her more regularly. What are you thinking? Rachel asked. I don't know. Maybe we look at hiring someone? An in-home aide? Or? That's expensive, Rachel said. I know. We could split the cost. Let me think about it. I could also try to come out more, maybe one of my long weekends. She came out 6 weeks later. Stayed for 4 days. It was a good visit. She helped organize some things around the house. She took Mom to one of her appointments. Then she went back to New York and things returned to what they had been. The turning point came during the 3rd year after the diagnosis. Mom fell again, this time in the bathroom. She lay on the floor for 2 hours before she was able to get to her phone. When I got the call, she was crying, not from pain but from embarrassment and fear. She told me she'd been afraid she wouldn't be able to get up. 2 hours. Alone on the bathroom floor. I drove to Salem that night, and I didn't really go back. I went back to Portland to manage the logistics of unwinding my life there. Gave notice on my apartment. Had several difficult conversations with my employer. They let me transition to part-time remote work initially, but within 3 months it was clear that caregiving is a full-time undertaking and a part-time job is not actually part-time when you are managing someone else's entire existence alongside your own work. I resigned. I moved into my childhood bedroom at 35 years old. I want to be honest about what this period of my life looked like, because I think people who haven't done it sometimes imagine caregiving as a kind of extended hospital visit. A temporary thing. Something with a clear shape. It is not like that. It is an entire life absorbed by another person's needs. Not because the person is demanding. My mother was not demanding. She was, if anything, too stoic, too reluctant to ask for help, too insistent that she was fine when she was not fine. The work was constant because the needs were constant, not because she asked too much. A typical day looked like this. Wake up at 6:30 because that was when Mom was most alert, and we needed to get her medications timed correctly before breakfast. Help her with her morning routine. She retained more independence than many Parkinson's patients do in the middle stages, but she needed assistance with balance and with fine motor tasks. Make breakfast. Drive her to 1 or 2 appointments a week, sometimes more during periods when we were managing new symptoms or medication adjustments. Manage correspondence, insurance claims, prescription refills, financial paperwork. Prepare meals. Monitor for falls. Sit with her in the evenings watching the old movies she loved, because even when she was tired and frustrated by her own body, she did not want to be alone. But there was more to it than the practical tasks, and I think the practical tasks are the only part that people on the outside tend to picture. There is also the emotional labor that runs beneath everything else, constant and invisible. There is the labor of witnessing, of watching someone you love lose ground slowly, and absorbing that reality day after day without a place to put it, because the person you would normally talk to about something this heavy is the person you are watching it happen to. There is the labor of managing your own grief while the person is still alive. You are not allowed to fully grieve a living person. You are not allowed to break down in front of them because they are already dealing with more than enough. So you grieve in increments privately, in the car after a difficult appointment, in the shower in the morning, in the half hour you have to yourself late at night after they've gone to sleep, and before you have to do the same so you can wake up and do it all again. There is the labor of being cheerful, of walking into your mother's bedroom in the morning and saying good morning in a voice that sounds like everything is manageable, when some days everything is not manageable and you know it and she knows it and you are both pretending otherwise for the other one's sake. There is the labor of making decisions you were not trained to make, medical decisions, financial decisions, decisions about quality of life and level of intervention and what a good day looks like versus a day that needs professional attention. I am a marketing manager. I became, over 3 years, something resembling a part-time nurse, part-time social worker, part-time financial administrator. None of that training came with a certificate. And there is the labor of invisibility. No one saw most of what I did. The appointments, yes. The driving, yes. But the 6:30 medication timing, the fall prevention routines, the hour I spent on hold with the insurance company to correct a billing error, the note I left by the coffee maker every night so that Mom would remember in the morning what she was supposed to take and when, none of that was visible to anyone but me. And, as it turned out, not even fully to my mother. He was patient for a while and then he wasn't, and I understood. I wasn't available in the ways a relationship requires. I was present for my mother, and that was most of what I had. I lost touch with friends gradually. Not dramatically. They didn't abandon me. I just became someone who was always unavailable, always tired, always consumed by the logistics of a life that had shrunk down to one street in Salem, and eventually people stop calling when they know you'll only say you can't make it. Rachel called on weekends. She visited at Thanksgiving. She came out once in the spring and once in the fall. She sent money to help with expenses, usually a few $100s, sometimes more around the holidays. She and I talked often and the conversations were kind. She asked how Mom was doing. She asked how I was doing. She said repeatedly that she didn't know how I did it and that she was so grateful I was there. But she was not there. I never said that to her directly. I did not frame it as an accusation. I did not keep a ledger. I told myself that we were different people with different lives, that Rachel was contributing what she could, that this was just how it had worked out. I believed that. I believed we were a team even if the contributions were unequal. I believed that my mother saw and understood the sacrifice I was making. Mom was diagnosed with a secondary condition, mild cognitive impairment, about 18 months before she died. It did not rob her of her personality or her clarity in the way that some dementias do. She knew who I was. She knew where she was. She could still hold a conversation, still laugh at the things that made her laugh, still give her opinions with that quiet, dry precision she'd always had. But she was more easily confused about time. She occasionally had difficulty tracking long sequences of events. She was more emotionally variable than she had been, sometimes tearful in the mornings for no reason she could name, sometimes anxious about things that had already been handled. I did not think at the time to worry about the will. That sounds naive now. I know that. But I want to explain the texture of that period honestly. I was tired. I was managing medication schedules and insurance appeals and fall prevention protocols and grocery runs, and doctor's visits, and the emotional labor of watching someone you love diminish. I was not thinking about inheritance. I was thinking about whether Mom had taken her 11 o'clock medication, and whether the railing on the front steps needed to be reinforced before winter. Our neighbor, Pat, a woman in her late 60s who had known my mother for 20 years, mentioned it to me in passing one afternoon in October. We were both at the mailbox. I saw Diana had a visitor a few weeks ago, Pat said. The man from the law office. The one in the gray car. I recognized him from when your mother bought the house. I said something like, "Oh yes, she has some documents to update periodically," and thought nothing more about it. I did not ask my mother about it. In retrospect, I wonder if some part of me didn't want to know. Or perhaps I simply trusted her in a way that made the question feel unnecessary. She was my mother. I was caring for her in her home. Some things do not require discussion. My mother died on a Wednesday morning in March. She passed at home in her bedroom as she had wanted. I was there. Rachel had flown in 3 days earlier when it became clear things were entering the final stage. We were both there when it happened. I will not describe those final hours in detail. Some things are private. I will say only that my mother died peacefully, and that she knew she was loved, and that I am grateful she did not die alone or in a facility. Rachel stayed for the service and the immediate aftermath. We cleaned out some of Mom's belongings together. We cried together. We held each other at the graveside. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral. I want to describe that room exactly because I think about it often. It was a small conference room in an attorney's office on the north side of Salem. Dark wood table. 3 chairs. The attorney Gerald Marsh had worked with my mother for many years. He was professional and efficient and clearly somewhat uncomfortable. Rachel and I sat across from him. Gerald read through the procedural language. Then he got to the material provisions. The house, the 3-bedroom craftsman in Salem, the house where our mother had lived for 31 years, the house where Rachel and I had grown up, the house where I had spent 3 years as a full-time caregiver, was bequeathed in its entirety to Rachel. Appraised value: $380,000. To me, Diana Whitfield left personal belongings of sentimental value, her vehicle, a 7-year-old sedan worth approximately $9,000, and a cash sum of $15,000. There was also an attached letter. Gerald read it quietly, in a neutral voice, as though its contents were ordinary. Diana had written that she believed Rachel needed a stable foundation to establish herself and build her future. That she had always worried about Rachel's ability to put down roots, to have security, To stop moving through life without an anchor. She had written that, Claire, that I had always been capable of taking care of myself, that I was resilient, that I would land on my feet no matter what, that she did not worry about me the way she worried about Rachel. Gerald finished reading. The room was quiet. I looked at Rachel. Rachel was looking at the table. She changed this 18 months ago, Gerald said gently. She was clear and consistent in her wishes at the time of the change. I remember thinking that 18 months ago, I had been living in that house for over a year already. I had already left my career. I had already given up my apartment. I had already been the person waking up at 6:30 every morning to make sure her medications were timed correctly. She had known all of that when she made the change. And she had decided that my capability was the reason I needed less. I did not cry in that room. I don't know why. I think I was simply too stunned. Rachel spoke first on the drive back. I didn't know, she said. I want you to know that. I had no idea she'd done that. Okay, I said. I'm not going to. I don't know what to do with this, Claire. I don't know what to say. There's nothing to say. There was a long silence. I could, she started. Don't, I said. Not right now. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. The days after the will reading were some of the hardest of my life, which is saying something given that I had just spent 3 years in a sustained state of sacrifice and emotional depletion, and had just lost my mother. I was processing grief and betrayal simultaneously, and I discovered that they are not compatible emotions. Grief wants you to soften. Betrayal wants you to harden. The two things pulling in opposite directions created a kind of internal paralysis I had never experienced before. I called my closest friend, Margot, who I had largely lost touch with over the previous 3 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a long time and then she said, Claire, that's not okay. That is genuinely not okay. It helped to hear someone say it plainly. I had been going over and over my mother's reasoning, capable, resilient, will land on her feet, and trying to understand it from her perspective, trying to give her the charity one naturally wants to give the dead, especially a parent. But the more I turned it over, the more it revealed itself as something I could not rationalize away. She had watched me give up my career. She had watched me give up my apartment and move back into my childhood bedroom. She had watched me attend every appointment, manage every insurance form, coordinate every prescription refill, sit with her through every difficult night. She had lived in the daily reality of what I was doing for 3 years. And she had decided that the daughter who called on Sundays and flew in twice a year needed more protection than the one who was there every morning. I'm still not sure fully why. I have thought about it more than is probably healthy. My best understanding is this. My mother loved Rachel in a worried way and loved me in a confident way. She looked at Rachel and saw fragility. She looked at me and saw strength. And she made her decisions based on who she thought needed more help, without stopping to consider that the strong one was the one who had just given everything she had. Being perceived as capable is its own kind of trap. People assume that because you can handle things you do not need support. They assume that because you don't ask for help you don't need it. They assume that because you show up without complaint showing up costs you nothing. My mother, who loved me, made all of those assumptions. About 2 weeks after the will reading, Rachel called. I need to talk to you about the house, she said. Okay. I've been thinking about it a lot. I want to be fair. I don't feel right about how this worked out. I waited. I'm going to sell it, she said. The house. And I want to split the proceeds with you 50-50. I was quiet for a moment. You're going to sell it? I can't keep a house in Salem. I live in New York. I'm not going to move back. It doesn't make sense to keep it as a rental. So yes, I'm going to sell it. And I want to give you half. I thought about what that meant in practical terms. Half of the sale price after fees would be somewhere around $170,000. That was significant money. It would give me a foundation. It would help me rebuild. And I thought about what it meant in every other way. Rachel was not splitting an inheritance. She was selling our childhood home, the house our mother had spent 31 years in, the house I had spent 3 years caring for, and cutting me a check. A generous check, yes, but one generated by selling something that should never have been entirely hers to sell. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I do. But Rachel, you're selling Mom's house. I know. You're selling the house I've lived in for 3 years, the house I gave up my career to be in. And then you're splitting the money with me as if that makes it equal. I'm trying to make it right, Claire. I know you are. I believe that you mean that. But making it right is not the same as it being right. She was quiet. What do you want me to do? She asked. There was a note of frustration in her voice now. Not anger exactly, but the frustration of someone who believes they are being generous and finds that generosity insufficient. I want you to understand what I gave up, I said. I want you to understand that a check, even a fair check, doesn't undo the fact that Mom looked at 3 years of my life and decided it was evidence that I needed less. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what she decided. I can't change what she decided. No, I said. You can't. We talked for a while longer. It was not a fight exactly. It was two people trying to find language for something that language doesn't quite reach. In the end, I told her that I needed time before I could make any decisions about anything. She respected that. The house sold 4 months after Mom's death. Rachel did split the proceeds with me, as she'd said she would. I received $168,000. It is not nothing. I want to be clear about that. That money has allowed me to rebuild in ways that would have taken me years longer without it. I found a small apartment in Portland. I started contract work in marketing, rebuilding a resume that had a 3-year gap I now describe honestly. I was a full-time family caregiver, because I have decided I am not ashamed of it, even when some employers treat it like a liability. But here is what that money does not cover and cannot cover. It does not cover the 3 years of income one did not earn. At my previous salary, I would have made somewhere between $210,000 and $240,000 over those 3 years. I did not make that. I spent, in fact, on expenses that Mom's limited savings and small Social Security income did not fully cover, a significant portion of what savings I had. It does not cover the career trajectory I departed from. I was on track for a director-level position before I left. I am rebuilding from a much lower starting point now, in a field where 3 years out can feel like a decade. It does not cover the relationship I lost. James and I ended things 18 months into my time as a caregiver. He was a good man who deserved a partner who could be present, and I was not able to be that. I don't blame him, but that is still something I lost. It does not cover the friendships I let atrophy. Most of them have recovered somewhat. Margot especially has been consistent and kind through all of this, but relationships that go 3 years without nourishment do not simply spring back to full life. And it does not cover the very specific grief of understanding that your mother, the person you sacrificed for, did not see your sacrifice the way you lived it. I have thought often about what I wish my mother had done differently. I wish she had talked to me. That is the simplest answer. I wish that at some point during those 3 years she had said, "Claire, I am thinking about the house. I want to understand how you're feeling. I want to tell you what I'm considering and why." She did not do that. I think she believed she was protecting me from an uncomfortable conversation. Or perhaps she believed that because I was capable, I did not need to be consulted. Or perhaps she felt guilt about what she was planning and avoiding the conversation was a way of managing that guilt. There is also the possibility, and this one is the hardest to sit with, that she changed the will precisely because she knew I would say something. That she made the change quietly without telling me, because some part of her understood it would not seem fair, and she did not want to have the argument. It is easier to make a unilateral decision when the person most affected by it has no idea the decision is being made. I will never know. That is the honest answer. I have theories and I have grief and I have the words she left in that letter, and I am left to construct whatever understanding I can from those materials. What I know is this: she saw me every day for 3 years. She knew what I had given up. She was not confused about that, even during the period when confusion was beginning to affect her in other ways. On the contrary, she was lucid and consistent and clear in her expression of gratitude for what I was doing. She said thank you often. She said she didn't know what she'd do without me. She said more than once that I was her anchor. And 18 months before she died, she wrote a legal document describing me as someone who doesn't need much. Those two things do not fit together. And the dissonance between them, between the mother who called me her anchor and the document that called me self-sufficient, is something I have been trying to metabolize for months. I will never know because she is gone, and the conversation we never had is one of the many things I will carry from this period of my life. Before I get to that, I want to tell you about the months between the will reading and the sale of the house, because that period had its own particular quality of pain that I think deserves to be named. I was still living in the house. I had 30 days, technically, from the time probate was settled and Rachel formally took possession. 30 days to move out of the house where I had spent 3 years, where my mother had died, where my childhood bedroom still had the same window that looked out onto the oak tree in the backyard. Rachel did not rush me. I want to be fair about that. She called and said, "Take the time you need. I'm not in any hurry." And she meant it. She is not a cruel person. She did not handle any of this with cruelty. But I was still moving out of my mother's house on a timeline set by a will I had not known existed, and every day I spent in those rooms felt like proof of something I was still trying to not believe. I packed my mother's things and my own things simultaneously, which was its own strange experience. Her gardening gloves, worn soft from years of use, her collection of film programs from the old movie theater downtown that closed when I was in high school, the coffee mug she had used every morning for as long as I could remember, white, with a small chip on the handle that she had never gotten around to replacing because she always said it still worked fine. I kept the mug. I kept the gardening gloves. I took the film programs, all of them, and wrapped them carefully in newspaper the way she would have. I left the house on the last day of my 30 days, loaded everything I owned into a rented cargo van, and drove to Portland in the rain. I cried for about 45 minutes on the highway and then I stopped because there was nothing else to do and I needed to drive. I want to say something about caregiving because I think it is important and because I think people who have not done it do not fully understand what they are asking when they say things like "you should have known," or "you should have checked on the will," or "you should have had a legal agreement." When you are a caregiver, especially a family caregiver, especially a sole family caregiver, especially for a parent, you are not operating in the mode of self-protection. You are operating in the mode of service. You are focused relentlessly on the person you are caring for, their comfort, their safety, their dignity, their quality of life in the time they have remaining. You are not thinking about what you are owed. You are not thinking about what you are giving up in innumerable terms. You are not treating the situation as a transaction that needs to be documented. You are just doing what needs to be done. And then, when it is over, you look up and discover that the world does not necessarily see what you have given, that the people you gave it to do not necessarily see it, that the legal and financial structures that were in place before you gave anything are still in place, unchanged regardless of what you gave. I have spoken to other caregivers since my mother died. Women mostly. Daughters and daughters-in-law who gave up years of their lives and came out the other side with nothing legally formalized, nothing officially recognized, nothing to show for it except the experience of having done it. This is apparently common. Devastatingly, infuriatingly common. I found a support group about 8 months after Mom died. Not grief counseling specifically, though there was grief in that room always, but a group for people who had been primary family caregivers and were navigating the afterward. The period after caregiving ends, whether through the person's recovery or their death, is something that doesn't get discussed much. Everyone talks about the caregiving itself. No one talks much about what happens when the thing you organized your entire life around is over. There were about 10 women in that group, ranging in age from mid-30s to early 60s. Some had cared for parents. Some had cared for spouses. Some had cared for siblings. All of them had put their own lives on hold in ways large and small. Several of them had experienced something similar to what I had experienced with the will. Not always money. Sometimes it was a different kind of dismissal. A parent who had praised them endlessly for their sacrifice while privately expressing to other family members that they had simply done what was expected. A sibling who had swooped in during the final weeks and been treated as equally present by the parents' friends and community, despite having been absent for the years that mattered. A family who had celebrated the caregiver during the caregiving and then, when the time came to divide things and make decisions, had somehow forgotten to factor in what the caregiver had given. The pattern was remarkably consistent. The person who shows up is taken for granted precisely because they show up. Their presence becomes baseline. It becomes expected. It stops being remarkable because it is no longer remarkable. It is just what happens every day because they made it happen every day. And the person who does not show up retains the quality of absence. Their visits are events. Their calls are noticed. Their presence, when it occurs, has the quality of a gift. My mother loved both of her daughters. I believe that completely. But she experienced Rachel as someone whose love she had to work to receive, and she experienced mine as something ambient and constant and reliable. Rachel's love felt like a choice. Mine felt like weather. And we tend to value the things that feel like choices more than we value the things that feel like weather, even when the weather is what sustains us. I am not saying my mother was a bad person. I am not saying Rachel is a bad person. I am saying that families are complicated and that the way love gets perceived and valued and ultimately rewarded is not always fair, and that the people who are the most selflessly present are often the ones who pay the highest price for it. That, I have learned, is more common than any of us want to admit. I am not saying that caregiving should be transactional. I am not saying that I helped my mother because I expected a reward. I helped my mother because she was my mother and she was ill and she needed me. But I am saying that when families make decisions about who gets what, those decisions should account for what people gave. Not as a transaction, not as a bill to be paid, but as an acknowledgement of reality, as a recognition of what one person's life looked like in service of another person's well-being. My mother's will did the opposite of that. It looked at what I gave and treated it as a demonstration that I didn't need as much. That is the thing I have had the hardest time reconciling. Several months after the will reading, Rachel came to Portland. We had dinner. It was the first time we had seen each other since Mom's memorial. It was not a comfortable dinner, but it was an honest one. She said things I think she had been holding for a while, that she felt guilty, that she had always known, even during those 3 years, that she was not carrying her share, that she told herself the money she sent was a contribution but that she really knew it was not the same as what I was doing. She said she thought about it all the time, that she had dreams about the house where she would wake up feeling like something was wrong. I appreciated her honesty. I told her that. I also told her the things I had been holding. I told her that I had never blamed her, during those 3 years, for living her life in New York, that I had made my choices and I owned them, but that I had needed to believe in order to make those choices sustainable that they were seen, that the sacrifice was visible, that at the end of it all, when the accounting happened, emotional, financial, familial, the reality of what I had given would be part of the picture. My mother's will had made clear that it was not. And that was the hardest part. Not the money, not the house, but the understanding that the person I had been closest to in those 3 years, the person I had organized my entire life around, had looked at my devotion and described it, in a legal document, as evidence of my independence. Rachel cried at dinner. I did not. I had cried enough by then. We did not resolve everything that night. We are not the sisters we were before all of this. I am not sure we ever will be exactly. There is something between us now, not resentment exactly, but a reckoning with a version of our family that turned out to be different from the one we thought we were in. But we are still sisters. We still talk. We are still finding our way through something neither of us chose, neither of us caused, and neither of us knows quite how to carry. I am 38 now. I have a small apartment in Portland's northeast, 2 blocks from a coffee shop I have become a regular at, on a street where I can hear the neighborhood going about its life outside my window. It is not the apartment I had before. It is smaller, but it is mine and I chose it, and that matters. I am working again. Contract work for now, building back towards something permanent. My resume has a gap in it that I explain honestly and without apology. I cared for a family member. That is what I did. I am not ashamed of it. I am in therapy. That is not a small thing to admit. I was resistant to it for a long time, in the way that people who are used to being capable tend to be resistant to admitting they need support. But the grief from losing my mother and the grief from what her will revealed are not simple things, and I was not processing them well on my own. My therapist said something during one of our early sessions that I have thought about often since. She said, "The story you are grieving is not just the story of your mother's death. It is also the story of who you believed you were to her, and what you have now found out instead." That is exactly right. I loved my mother. I do not doubt that she loved me. I do not think she intended to hurt me. I think she was a woman who made decisions based on what she feared, and she feared for Rachel in ways she never feared for me, and she never stopped to ask whether the person she didn't fear for might also need something. I am trying to hold both things at once, the love and the harm it caused, the intention and the result, the mother who held my hand while she could, and the will she left when she couldn't say any of it out loud. It is not easy to hold both things, but I think it is the only honest way through. If you are a caregiver right now, or if you are thinking about becoming one, or if you have a family member who has become one for your parent or grandparent, I want you to hear something. What you are doing is real. Costs something real. The income you don't earn, the career that pauses, the relationships that strain under the weight of your absence, the friendships you don't have time to tend. These are real losses, even when they are also choices you made freely. You deserve to have those losses seen. Not rewarded necessarily in the way a business transaction is rewarded, but seen, acknowledged, named. If you are in a family where one person is doing most or all of the caregiving, that family should be having direct conversations about what that means for the future, about what fairness looks like, about whether the sacrifices being made in the present should be accounted for in the decisions made for after. Those conversations are hard. I understand why families avoid them, but the alternative is what happened to me, finding out in a lawyer's conference room that the 3 years you gave were noted as proof that you didn't need anything. I am not the villain of my mother's story, and I am not trying to be the villain of this one either. I am just a woman who showed up, did what needed to be done, and came out the other side having to reckon with what showing up actually costs when no one is paying attention to the cost. My mother is gone. The house is gone. 3 years of my working life are gone. What remains is this: I know who I am. I know what I gave. I know that I was there every day for every hard morning and every difficult night, for every appointment and every form and every moment when she needed someone, and I was the person who stayed. No will changes that. No legal document rewrites what actually happened. I was there. And someday I think that will be enough to make peace with. It is not enough yet, but I am working toward it. Have you ever sacrificed your career, your savings, or years of your life to care for a parent, only to feel overlooked when it mattered most? Have you ever been told by someone you gave everything to that your capability was a reason to give you less? Have you ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up because you chose to show up for someone else? Share your experience in the comments. The caregivers in this world carry more than most people see, and they deserve to be seen. If you believe that you cannot let someone give up everything to take care of you and then quietly leave them out of the will, hit that like button and subscribe. Because being strong does not mean you need less. And being present does not mean you should be taken for granted. And showing up every day should count for something when the accounting finally comes. #she sacrificed everything and got left.